Story 1. The Man on Easter Island. It's just a legend, but I suppose that's what most of those unbelievable things turn out to be. Legends. I heard this legend from my grandmother. I asked her about it when I saw her drawing the Easter Island heads on a piece of construction paper. Actually, when she found out that my dad never told it to me, she was a bit upset. I guess it's family tradition. She even made me promise to tell it to my children. My grandma originally heard it from her mother, who heard it from her mother. Well, you know how these things work. It goes back in my family for as long as anyone can remember. You see, if you trace back my family far enough, you'd never leave the United States. The earliest official records of my family say that we started in Hawaii, but according to my grandma, we actually started out on Annis Land in the southern Pacific Ocean, Easter Island, or, as my grandma ordered me to call it, Rapa Nui. That's where this legend comes from, supposedly and altered exactly the way it was told centuries and centuries ago. According to the legend, the people on Rapa Nui had always been in touch with the spirits. They had their ceremonies. They did their fair share of sacrifices, etc. Sure, these days the idea of sacrificing an animal to a goddess M's a bit crazy, but keep in mind that it was normal. Back then, it was all they knew. The civilization had worshipped the spirits that they believed walked among them since the dawn of time. Well, actually, I should say flew. Apparently, the spirits that my wise ancestors worshipped were actually giant, creator bird people. Not that I'm judging or anything, but then, after hundreds of years of the same traditions, the same ceremonial rituals, the same chants, the same animal sacrifices, something changed. The people started to see something. Every once in a while, one would report seeing a man standing by them in the night. Occasionally, he stood at the edge of the forest and watched the people who dared to walk by alone. He could be seen in the shadows, in the water, in the trees, or even in the grass, regardless of where he was or who saw him, though he always looked the same. He was reportedly very tall and covered in wrinkly dark gray skin, and he had a long, almost rectangular head, but where his eyes should have been, he had two deep, smooth depressions surrounded by shadows. His giant nose was also rectangular, and the bridge he sunk back into the shadows along with the eye sockets. His mouth, stretched into a long, dark frown, rested above a square chin. His arms were short compared to the rest of his body. They were nothing but stubs, but when he moved them, it seemed that he had at least 10 joints. I asked my grandma if she meant like tentacles. She said no, because tentacles flow, and the hand's arms were rigid and stiff. Apparently, he had 2 legs like any human, but they curled up and contracted like a worm until they were inside him. He didn't need legs, my grandma said, to be tall. The first time somebody saw the man, the village thought he was insane. He talked nonstop about this man that only he could see. He tried to describe the mysterious figure and insisted that it was familiar to all of them, that they'd all seen it before dozens of times. No one could understand the descriptions of the man, though. A week passed, and the man from the village saw the strange being, who, from now on, I will refer to as the Moai Moor, and more frequently. But the more he tried to explain to his family what the Moai looked like, the less they understood what he meant. Then, exactly a week after first seeing it, the man was found dead where he slept. The Rapa Nui people thought that their gods had struck him down for blasphemy, and they chose to never speak of him or the Moai again. However, about 2 weeks later, another member of the village claimed to have seen the Moai one night. She said that he didn't watch her, but simply stood over her, staring straight forward into the darkness. However, she also mentioned how the man who saw it before was absolutely right now that she saw it. She knew it. She had known its face, with its sunken eyes, its pointed nose, its bald, wrinkled head, and its eternally closed mouth. The villagers thought that she had gone mad as well, and ignored her as she described the Moai to them. A week after she first saw it, she, too, was found dead. She had eaten a poisoned berry by mistake. The people of Rapa Nui kept on seeing the Moai, and everyone who saw it died 7 nights Ada, it wasn't like a plague, though it wasn't like the Moai, would appear to people, therefore condemning them to death. It seemed that those who saw it would have died anyway. It was more of a warning than a sentence, and each time someone saw it, they would realize that they knew its face like they knew the camp in which they lived, like it had always been there, and they just didn't realize until they saw it. But the people who couldn't see the Moai swore that they had never seen anything like what those who could were describing before. But one thing about the clan's attitude towards the Moai did eventually change. The chief decided that it was an evil spirit who appeared to those who were to die. One man who saw the Moai got so frustrated that no one knew what it looked like that he decided to carve it out for his fellow villagers to see. He made it out of the tallest boulder he could find, and he carved the omen exactly as he saw it. But the Rapa Nui people, upon looking at the effigy, held that they had never seen the thing before. The man who carved the statue was so angry that he took one of the stone tools that he had used to carve the statue and slit his throat open. At this point, I silently decided never to tell this story to my children. He ended his own life exactly 1 week after he first saw the Moai. Then, something terrible happened. I guess you could call it genocide, but it's not like you'd expect. You see, the clan's chief demanded to know what the Moai really looked like. If everyone who saw the Moai recognized it, then they should have recognized the statue, too. But they didn't, so they needed another skilled carver to see the Moai and make as many statues as he could. And here's the terrible genocide-ish part. The natives came up with an idea. Everyone who knew how to carve stone was to kill themselves in a week. That was the plan. The plan was for the carvers to plan to kill themselves. As well, it worked, and they produced quite a few statues out of it. But by the time that the workers ended their lives, the chief looked upon the statues that had been produced and saw that the Moai were all identical to the original. So he ordered more people to kill themselves. Not enough people volunteered. So he sought help from other clans on Rapa Nui. None of the others had heard of the strange Moai creature that the messengers talked about. But after someone from the first tribe visited another tribe, then people from that new tribe began to see it too. Suddenly, it was an island-wide disaster, and every craftsman on Rapa Nui was ordered to be executed in 7 days. It worked, and every craftsman began seeing the Moai. They carved it into the boulders to prove what it looked like, but they were still almost exactly the same, and still no one knew the face. My grandma said that the mass homicides and suicides went on for almost a year until finally every chief, all at once, saw the moai. They realized that the people they had killed had really been carving the statues perfectly the entire time. They stopped ordering deaths of stone carvers, but that didn't stop the uprising all across the island that took the life of every chief. That's where the legend part stops, I'm afraid, because the people of the island stopped carving the statues after that, and a few hundred years later the Europeans arrived. They were a bit surprised by the statues which, by the way, had since been positioned along the shoreline in hopes of frightening away any more dark spirits. They figured that the statues of the moai were simply erected in honor of the Rapa Nui ancestors. It wasn't until one of the settlers started seeing the moai that they realized what the statues were. They thought that the Rapa Nui natives had summoned the evil spirit by building the statues, and they tried tearing them down. It obviously didn't work. I asked my grandma what happened next. I mean, obviously people who visited Rapa Nui didn't still see the moai when they were about to die, did they? She told me that it only ever appeared to the people who currently lived on the island and the direct descendants of the original island natives. Visitors weren't haunted by it. I asked her if I would see it when it was time for me to die, since she had just told me that I was a direct descendant of the Rapa Nui natives. She just smiled and laughed quietly as if I had just told a joke. Then I asked her why no one knew about this legend. I mean, if the moai still appeared to some people, don't you think they'd want to tell someone? She told me that the locals know not to make a big deal out of it. The more they talk about the moai, the more often it appears to them. She said that some people went mad if they didn't talk about it, though apparently the fact that no one understands exactly how familiar the moai is until they see it is almost too frustrating to handle. Sometimes it's so unbearably maddening that its victims end up killing themselves, making me wonder exactly how true my statement about how the moai doesn't condemn people to death by appearing to them really was. But people find their own ways to deal with it during their last week of life. Some people travel to Rapa Nui to see the ancient statues. Some people make their own mini sculptures of the creature. Some people simply draw the moai on paper just to make it easier to deal with the stress. My grandmother died 4 days later. Story 2. The Rationalist's Mantra. I'm a rational person. I'm an atheist, a skeptic about most things, and I trust in science. But sometimes I don't act in the most rational way. After using the toilet in the night, I run up the stairs as fast as I can, as if something is chasing me. I can't explain it, I just do it. I mutter my mantra every time I feel scared. Nothing is trying to hurt me. There are no such things as ghosts. I close my eyes whilst shutting curtains at night. Once again, I have no explanation for this, do I? Really think someone or something is looking in? Not really, but something inside me compels me to do it. Of course, nothing is trying to hurt me. There are no such things as ghosts. As a child, as most children do, I believed in things like ghosts. Perhaps it was because my grandparents would always tell me stories, and they'd always talk of their haunted house. Whenever I visited their house, I was sure to stick close to my parents, just in case something happened. The house had a huge garden, which as my grandparents aged, became harder and harder to maintain. my parents' wool, load go each week and do weeding, cut the hedge, and any other jobs that my grandparents needed doing. I would sit in the sunroom at the side of the house watching television whilst they did this. The sun room was next to a courtyard, and I could usually see my parents around the corner if I felt scared, as I often did in the house. Once I was watching something on the TV, and my grandfather walked into the room. I barely registered his presence. If it weren't for the chill that gripped me despite the summer sun, I looked up from the cartoon and smiled at him. He just stared at me for a moment before walking out of the room. For some reason, this shook me greatly, so I walked over to the window to gaze at my parents pulling weeds from the ground, which usually eradicated any worries, except what I saw made my blood freeze. My granddad was outside with my parents, digging something with a spade. There was no way he could have made it that far in that time, and needless to say, I ran out of that room as fast as I could and helped with the gardening. I never went into that room again after that. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know. He stared at me. I keep telling myself my mantra. Nothing is trying to hurt me. There are no such things as ghosts. But sometimes it feels like I'm kidding myself. One night, we had to stay overnight at the house. I don't know why exactly. I was only around 8 years old. But it might have been around the time my granddad died, and my nan liked the company. The house was quite large, and my nan slept in her room, my parents across the hall in another, and me on the floor above in a room on my own. The room was massive, and was the only room in the house overlooking the small courtyard to the side of the house. Barely any light reached the room, and there were no street lamps outside the house. My bed was a queen-sized bed, and I slept right in the center. I remember thinking that if I slept too close to the edge I'd be pulled off. Just a silly child thing. Well, maybe not. The details of the night were fuzzy, but the memory scarred itself on my mind. I still can't remember to this day whether my experience was a dream or not. When I told my parents the next day, they convinced me it was all a dream. But this dream, if that's what it was so vivid, so lifelike that it had to be real. I remember waking up in the middle of the night. The house was completely still. There were no cars outside, nothing. A grandfather clock in the corner of the room ticked, and I could see the outline of the pendulum swinging in the darkness. But that wasn't the only thing moving in the room. The wall against which the clock stood looked as if it were vibrating, like it was made of jelly. Something came out of it. A hand. The hand was completely white, and as much as I always tried to avoid using this word, it was the only word that I could think of. It was a ghost. I pulled the cover tightly over my body, and I squinted my eyes so that I could barely see. My eyesight now fuzzy, I could make out the outline of a pale figure emerge from the wall. It looked like a woman, not like the man I had seen before, and it looked like she was floating, as scary as it seemed. She, or seemed benign, that is, until she looked at me. Her eyes were wide, deranged almost, and it felt like 1,000 daggers hitting me at once. I instantly closed my eyes and buried myself under the covers, hoping they'd be enough to keep it out. I stayed under there for the rest of the night, muttering to myself constantly, "Nothing is trying to hurt me. There are no such things as ghosts. As soon as it was light, I pulled the covers off myself and looked around the room. Everything was as it was the night before, except the clock was no longer ticking. It had stopped just before midnight, a second before it would have chimed. I tried to put the whole thing out of my mind. At the time, I told myself it was all a dream, and I moved on. But a month later, a tragedy happened. After my granddad's death, my nan's 4 children took it in turns to sleep in the house with her, as she didn't like to sleep alone. My dad slept there on Sundays, but one day my mom's mom fell ill, and so he visited her in hospital, meaning the house was empty apart from my nan, and that's when it happened. The next morning, as my auntie went round the house, she discovered my nan lying on her bed, murdered. Her neck had been sliced, but there was no evidence of any forced entry. My parents tried to protect me from the truth, being only 11 years old. What I heard the police tell them everything. When I heard it, I was sure she was murdered by that woman I saw that night. Or perhaps the man who looked like my granddad. Now, as a man of science, I am not so sure, but nobody else had a motive. She was loved by everyone on the street, and she had no enemies. They never did find whoever did it, but they did find out her time of death. Midnight, the house was put on sale after her murder, but nobody bought the house, as prospective buyers were put off by its reputation. So, instead of selling the house, my parents decided to move into it. I remember begging them to reconsider, but when they asked me why I was ashamed to tell them the truth, they would have laughed at me. Even though in my mind I was sure that what I saw was real, my parents slept in my nan's old room, and I slept in the room opposite. Despite my opposition to living there, I was glad I wasn't in the isolated room on the top floor. With all my toes, my room felt a bit more comfortable, like it was my own. We lived in the house for months, and it was uneventful. I eventually forgot my past experiences in the house and persuaded myself it was all a dream, like I suspected. But one night it happened again, just when I was free of the tormenting memory. I was once again visited by the woman, but this time she didn't pass through the wall. I was lying in bed, drifting off to sleep, when the bed suddenly jolted, the springs pressing down, as if someone had sat on it. I instantly pulled in my legs and once again uttered my mantra, but it was cut short when I felt my legs brush against something at the foot of the bed. I pulled the cover over my head, hoping it would go away, but the duvet began to lift. It was on the covers. Whatever it was, it started to touch me, its body pressing up against mine. It slowly crawled along the bed until I could feel its breath on my face. I kicked out my legs towards it, hoping to push it away, but they met with nothing but air. I let out a scream, emptying my lungs so hard I began to retch. The cover was pulled from me, and I leapt from my bed, still trying to call for help. "Mom, please come." The door burst open, and my mom walked into the room. To the sight of me cowering in a corner with the duvet on the other side of the room, the woman, was gone. "What's the matter, honey?" she said as she came over to me. I was frozen in terror, staring blankly into the distance. "Honey, it's midnight. What's wrong?" My mom squeezed me tightly, resting her head on mine whilst saying comforting things. She kissed my forehead. "Something was in bed with me," I said quietly, as if I would summon it by speaking too loudly. He words felt ridiculous coming off my tongue, but I knew that I hadn't dreamt it that time. What I saw was real. I can't explain it, but it was real, and the most terrifying thing it never see. I'm back. I didn't sleep in my own bed for weeks, but when I did, nothing ever happened, and that, to me, was the worst thing. Whatever it was, it stopped appearing. I could barely sleep for years in the fear that it would return, sobbing every night at the thought of it touching me, and over time I became more and more paranoid it would come back. I thought it was surely overdue a visit. A few years later, we left the house suddenly. My parents offered no explanation, just that we had to move. But as we left, as if one last sick reminder, my parents and I all saw the specter standing in the top floor window, looking out at us, waving goodbye. But nothing is trying to hurt me. There are no such things as ghosts. Story 3. Echoes of daffodils. I know he knows I'm watching him. I can see Daffod look over his shoulder as he sits on his sofa. He is scanning the dark hallway behind him. He gets up and walks to his bedroom door, turns on the light and enters. He turns off the light and leaves a moment later. I imagine he has looked in the closet and under the bed. He walks down the hall to the bathroom, flicks on the light and enters. I can just see him standing at the sink, and then he moves where I can't see him. He takes a minute in there and comes back out. I can see him look all around his living room and kitchen area. He shrugs and sits back down to watch some 3 a.m. infomercial. I record all of this in my notebook. I have loved Daffod Swithin-Jones from the first moment I saw him through my binoculars. He is perfect. I know he loves me too. One day I will. D. Nicol Swithin-Jones. We were made for each other. That is how he knows I am out here, waiting for him. I know everything about Daffod, from his favorite food, Hawaiian pizza, to his work schedule, his sleep schedule, how often he showers, what he throws out as junk mail, how cute he looks sleeping in front of the TV, and where he likes to shop. I even know when his best free and his birthday is. Daffod was understandably sad when Kevin died in that horrible hit and run. I wanted to take him in my arms and never let him go, but the time wasn't right for us to meet, as Daffod still needed to break up with his bitch girlfriend Jennifer. Stupid name. Some good Samaritan sent him some compromising photos of her and some other guy. I watched the fight from my hiree, Essie, across the street. She looked like she was denying everything, crying and pleading. She even got down on her knees and begged. Dumb, cheating cow. My Daffod do what's what and threw her out. She is lucky nothing worse happened to her. Daffod is falling asleep. I smile and whisper, I love you. I will see you tomorrow, my darling. It will be a special day for us. I get up at 9 a.m. I watch Daffod's phone glow, and he reaches out to grab it. He gets up, stretches, and heads to the washroom. 9:18, he leaves wearing just a towel. He looks a little thinned. He goes to his room. I imagine him getting dressed. He checks himself in the mirror next to the front door right before he leaves at 9:27. A little behind schedule today. Daffod hasn't been sleeping very well lately. Today is magical. I am visiting our apartment today. Daffod dropped his key for me. Well, I followed him to work yesterday, and I made my copy. I knew he loved me. I left his keys with the consi, ready for him to pick up when he got home yesterday. I kept my copy on a chain close to my heart. I walk over to my boyfriend's place and enter. For the first time, I see myself in the mirror right beside the door. I look like I belong here. I look out the window at my window across the road. I wave and smile. I photograph everything. I start in his bedroom. It is exactly what I expected. He has a queen-size bed, comforter tossed to the floor, sheets askew. There are lots of mirrors on the closet door, hanging on the wall, and a tilting stand-up one. A few clothes are scattered about, but otherwise it's tidy like the rest of our place. I go through all his cupboards, shelves, and movie collection. I go into his bathroom. I watch my hand reach out to the mirror and open up the medicine cabinet. Daffod has the usual things in there: shaving gel, razor hand, cotton swabs. I look in the cupboard below, and there is toilet paper, extra sham, poo, and a hand mirror, but the bottle of sleeping pills bothers me. Once I am here permanently, I will rub his shoulders and he will sleep like the dead. He needs a woman's touch, someone to cool and clean for him, someone to take care of him, get him to work on time and schedule his day, and make him her priority. Jennifer couldn't, but I know I can. I write everything down in my notebook. When Daffod and I are together, everything will be perfect. I put on his dress shirt and lay down on his bed. I imagine how wonderful it would be if I could see out of every mirror in his apartment. He would never be lonely again because I would be with him all the time, and he would always feel my love. I know he can feel it now, but it would be more intense, like I was inside him. I wish he could see himself the way I see him. I daydream about how wonderful our lives will be. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up with a terrible fright. The only thing I can remember are of the nightmare were palest blue, ice-colored eyes burning through me with cold fire, a long black, cruelly sharpened nail piercing my throat, and a desperate sense of agreement. I look at the time, 6:42. Daffod will be home within 10 minutes. I grab my shirt and run out the door. I enter my apartment. Hugging Daffod's shirt around me, I head straight for the binoculars. My love pauses at the door to his apartment. Keys in hand, I forgot to lock the door. He looks confused and then somewhat frightened. I see his mouth open and he is yelling something. Washington. It's a moment and then enters. He jumps a bit at the mirror and stares intently at his reflection, and for a full minute before breaking his gaze. He slowly moves around his place looking at everything. He spends a long time in the bedroom, and I become concerned that he has missed the shirt, but he comes out in his shorts and heads to the bathroom. He stays at the sink for a long time. And he returns to the living room. He walks directly to his mirror and stands there motionless. After an eternity, he walks back to his bedroom. He is in there so long I thought that he must be sleeping but he walks to the bathroom and turns on the light, looking in the mirror. Eventually he walks out, turns on his kitchen light, and stands before his mirror by the door. Standing and staring. Eventually, he walks back to his bedroom and turns on the light. He does not come out for a long time, but I am waiting and watching. He walks into the bathroom. I feel so worried for him. This is not his normal behavior. He has been home for over 4 hours and has not eaten or turned on the TV. Something awful must have happened at his office today. I wonder if I should visit there and find the poor son who disturbed him this much. I time and note Daffod's movements. He spends 30 minutes in the doorway, an hour and a half in the bedroom, and an hour in the bathroom. He has been moving all night. I am getting very tired, but I am so worried about my boyfriend. I continue to watch him and his relentless circuit. He continues throughout the day, not eating, sleeping, or drinking. I cannot do the same. I eat, drink, and sleep when I get up at 1. He is in the bathroom. I can see his back. After a couple of minutes, he walks to the door and stops. I focus on the reflection of his face and the mirror. I can't see it very well, but I am sure there are serious shadows under his eyes. My Daffod looks so tired. All through the day and night he continues his pacing. He begins to stagger as he walks through his apartment. I can see a distinct sway when he is standing at the mirrors. I must have fallen asleep, because the sound of my binoculars falling wakes me up. I quickly grab them up and look for my love, but they won't focus. They're broken. All of Daffod's lights are still on. I can't see him. He must be in the bedroom. I stare as hard as I can at the doorway. I see a dark shape crawling from the bedroom heading for the bathroom. I can see the shape try and drag itself up against the whiteness of the sink. I have to help. I have my key. I could go over there, but I can sense the timing still isn't right for Daffod and me to meet. He might be overwhelmed by the intensity of his love for me, and he is already so unwell. I will call 911. I grab my phone, but my throat tightens in fear they might not understand the depths of my feelings. I can't call. I look out the window and see a street cleaner. I run out of my building as fast as I can and flag down the driver. He looks over at me running and asks, "Are you okay, miss?" Out of breath, I nod my head up and down. "Is someone hurt? Someone hurt?" I say. The driver asks, "Do you need an ambulance?" "Need an ambulance." I gesture at Daffod's building and I point upwards. Daffod's window was the only one lit up. I can see the driver understands which room. I feel so much better. What hour? And I hear him call 911 and that there is an ambulance on the way. The operator asks him to go into the building and let her know what is happening. The concierge lets the driver and escorts him to the elevator. I can see him on the phone talking while they step in. I head back to my apartment. Back at my window, I see the concierge and driver enter Daffod's apartment, where they find my darling lying on the bathroom floor. I can see some movement. It looks like they are doing CPR. The ambulance arrives within a few minutes, and I can see the ants take over in the bathroom. They don't continue for long. I see them lift Daffod's limp body onto the stretcher and cover it with a white sheet. Soundlessly I scream. They wheel him out. They stop suddenly. I can see the glitter of shatter. Head mirror falling to the pavement split the air brilliantly in the early morning sunlight. Reflected in my window are cold, pale, laughing eyes. Story 4. The story of her holding an orange. Part 4. If you haven't read my previous posts, please read stories 1, 2, and 3. Hey guys, after many PMs asking for an update, I decided to bring you up to speed on what's going on. But first, here is the screenshot of the desktop picture that Rose, her cult, put on my laptop. I haven't been able to find the original photo. or any kind of a hidden file woman on the left. T is my mother holding me, and woman on the right is her friend holding my childhood friend. We do not know who the child on the left or woman way in the back are. None of them remember this picture of being taken, so after I told my mom what was going on, she talked to my grandma. Grandma didn't tell her much, but my mom had a feeling that she got upset after hearing what was happening. I decided to call my grandma, and after much begging, I got this story out of her. My grandma was born in Croatia, but grew up in Bosnia. She was the kind of a child who'd spend every weekend outside playing, exploring, etc. Her favorite play spot was down by the river not too far from where she lived. She'd often go there with her friends, but on this particular day, none of her friends came along. She went there anyways. She was doing her traditional build a fortress in the sand thing when she heard someone calling. She looked to the road nearby, the only place where anyone could come from. There was only one path to the beach, but nobody was there. She shrugged it off and kept playing. She heard the call again, Dana. She looked around, nothing Dana. She jumped, terrified, and ran to the road to see what in the fuck was going on, but nobody was there. She thought one of her friends was fucking with her and decided to turn around and go back to the fortress. Then she saw him. It was a man of above average height, maybe 6'4", dressed in the suit and one of those hats that gentlemen wore in 30s. He had a dark black suit on with white. He dress shirt underneath and a black tie, holding a cane. Thing is, he was standing in the water knee-deep, in a suit that probably cost arm and a leg at that time. She was taken aback, but as any curious kid, she decided to check what was going on. She walked up to the border where waves were ending. He was still standing in the water. "Yes, mister," she asked politely. "I got something for you." "Yea, what's that?" "Well, as predictable as the story may be getting, it is unfortunately fucking true. It was an orange. My grandma grew up in wealthy-ish family, and even in the tough economic times, she had an abundance of fruit, so the orange wasn't causing a wow factor in her. Thanks, mister, but I just had lunch. You can give it tea." "Oh, someone else?" No, Dana. This one is specially for you." He tilted his head to the side, and for a second she thought his hat would fall into the river. It didn't. He still held an orange in his other hand, offering it. "But I don't want it. You take it. And you take it now. My grandma's been through a lot of shit. World War II and Bosnian War. She's seen shit, man, but she said she's never seen something as scary as that man's face that day. She was a child and therefore very impressionable with vivid imagination, but she swears that when he said that, his eyes, the white part, not the pupils, got much darker, and she could see the anger on his face. Although he had somewhat of a grin on, she started running away. She stopped and turned around to look if he was chasing her. He was just standing there, looking after her. She said she could see the darkness going away from his eyes. He put the orange back into his pocket, turned to the side, and started walking away through the fucking river, like step by step with his cane, just walking like he was on the street. My grandma was scared for a while, but after a few years, he was just a memory that was rarely recalled. My grandma gave birth to my mom in 52. It was a happy day because my mom was her first child. Birth went fairly easily, but she was kept in the hospital for a few days. Last night, Beth, or she was released. The man in the black suit came back almost 20 years later. She was sleeping. She had a room for herself. She woke up because light came on in her room. In scary movies, why, you hear the noise, but there is nobody there. Then suddenly they jump you from behind. Yea, that didn't happen. She opened her eyes, and he was just standing there in the middle of the room, the same man, same suit, same hat, not a day older than how he looked 20 years ago. Orange in his hand. You did good. What? What do you want from me? You brought her. Who? What do you want? You only now have to take this, and it will all be over. He was showing an orange, smiling. It wasn't a crazy grin, just an almost friendly smile. I don't want anything from you. Leave or I'll scream. Well, that's when he pulled the rose shit. He tilted his head to the side, put the scariest grin on his face, revealing the whitest teeth you'll ever see. He started speaking in the voice of a 10 to 12-year-old child. But, Dana, you don't know. Get out. He will take it, as he said that with his child voice. He lost a grin, put his head back in normal position, turned around, and walked away. Before he got out of the room, he turned the light off. She never told anyone about this man until I pulled it out of her. It's been little more than 30 years since then until she saw him one last time. It was war in Bosnia, country demolished by politician assholes who just wanted money. You know how wars work. Anyways, times were tough. Food supply was extremely limited. My grandma and grandpa would go days without eating. They'd hunt pigeons on the balcony and shit that bad. But then an orange started appearing on their doorstep every day, one orange in the center of the welcome rug. She remembers how bright it was compared to the grayness surrounding them. She'd throw every single one of those fuckers out. My GR and Pa was confused as to why she'd throw away perfectly good food in times like these, but she wouldn't tell him. Until they showed up. Yes, the man in black and, well, Rose, it was 93. They were bombing the shit out of their town that day, and nobody would even so much as stick their head through the window, let alone walk out. But my grandparents heard knocking. They thought someone had finally come to take care of them, knowing that intruder would enter anyways if they really wanted to. They opened. On their left, the same man was standing, same black suit, same hat, same cane, same age, more than 50 years later. Next to him was a woman in red shoes, white dress, long black hair, extremely pale skin color, and a lipstick so bright it would make you nostalgic for the grayness of wartime. She had her head tilted, too, smiling ear to ear. Hello, Dana. She spoke in a voice my grandma says could only belong to a very, very young girl. What the fuck is this? My grandpa asked immediately. Both of these peoples, I still call them people, faces lost grins, and looked at my grandpa. You may want to be silent. Ose spoke in her original adult voice, or what my grandma assumes would be her natural voice. My grandpa had been shot at, tortured, starved, but he never felt the fear like that. He lost his voice and shut the hell up. Their grins returned, head tilted, teeth popped out shiny as ever. Where is he? Rose asked her in her childish version of a voice. What do you want? From us we have nothing. Don't do this, just tell us where. Seemed like Rose was losing patience. But who? Your grandson. Her eyes pierced my grandma's soul. She felt blood freeze in her veins. He is not here. He is in Montenegro. She, though, that whoever these people are, they'd give up once they found that her grandson, presumably me, has moved away hundreds of miles away. They produced even wider smiles. If that was actually possible, they turned around almost synchronized and walked away. My grandparent watched them leave over the balcony. Bullets were flying around, bombs falling everywhere, and they were just walking down the street with no fucks given. Heads still tilted, they could see them smiling. So I'll be the first to call it bullshit, 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 bullshit. This is becoming a fairy tale. This ain't happening, man. Yea, I'm with you. Had I read it here or anywhere else, I'd enjoy the story, then tell Op to go fuck himself for trying to convince me this shit is real, but this shit is real. I have no logical explanation for it. Are they a cult? Maybe. Why don't they age? Why are they everywhere? Why are they following everyone I know? Fuck me if I know. Story 5. Boppy. Her name was Boppy. Boppy the clown. I met her at my first carnival. Carnivals never held much appeal to me other than their rides and excessively sweet, fattening treats. Such limitation was probably for the best. However, my parents insisted on dragging me along, knowing all too well that I had no interest. They also knew of another thing that never tickled my fancy: clowns, media's influence, no doubt. Clowns are rarely used for light-hearted entertainment nowadays. Not that old, droopy-faced car, NY's wearing oversized pantaloons and hideous, feature-distorting makeup, breath reeking of afternoon cigarettes and whiskey, were entertaining in the first place. But I'd take the more humanist version of a clown over Hollywood's bloodthirsty, murderous circus freaks any day. To be honest, I hated clowns, but Boppy was different. She was young, I'd guess no older than 24, and though she did have her face done up with the typical paint of a circus clown, it wasn't hideous or scary. In fact, it was kind of cute. She was so small, thin, limber body, and not an inch taller than 5 feet. I took in every detail. Her outfit, a playful fitting of mismatched fabrics and lively patterns lined with tassels and silver charms. A puffy tutu encompassing her tiny waist in an orbit of pastel pinks, blues, and greens. White and pink striped stockings covered her legs all the way down to the pair of ivory flats on her dainty feet. Choppy blonde fringe dusted the bridge of her painted nose, a delicately butchered curtain that could have only been achieved by the dull blade of a pocket knife. I watched her from beneath the shade of the closest prize tent. She was surrounded by a giggling gaggle of small children. They reached their greedy little hands in anticipation of the balloon animals quickly coming to life with help of the buoyant clown's dexterous fingers as she twisted and tied the inflated rubber. I wondered how long she'd practiced this particular skill. I imagined it took a great deal of focus and dedication to devote any extended amount of one's time to the art of making balloon animals. By glance of the glittering hoop, deck of cards, and various assortment of ribbons and juggling balls lying at her feet, I figured she had more than just one trick up her sleeve. Yes, I hated clowns, but Boppy was different, and she noticed me, same as I noticed her. I didn't expect it. I was just a patron like any other, clumsily waltzing through a maze of tents, kiosks, and food caravans. Maybe she felt me staring at her, a strange figure lingering a bit too long beneath a tent with a game they know. T spent a single penny on. Personally, I thought my hiding place to be flawless. Even still, she saw me. My heart raced as she waved off her child audience and made her way to the prize tent, too. Her steps were light, graceful. I noticed a slight skip, another quirk of her bubbly nature. My skin tingled with the buzz of my nerves. Hairs stood on end. I considered running, but it was too late. She had seen me, and I refused to make a fool out of myself, especially a fool in front of a cute girl. After all, what's the worst that could happen? "Hello," she said, looking up at me with a pair of bright green eyes. Her voice was soft and playful, polite and curious. "My name is Boppy," she revealed with a slight curtsy. "No, not Poppy, Boppy with a B." I was too stunned to respond, too tongue-tied to realize I never even called her Poppy. She laughed, most likely at my pitiful state of shock and crippling shyness that was hindering my ability to speak. "And you are?" Boppy inquired, tipping her messy blonde head to the side. A fragrant mix of cotton candy and saltwater taffy escaped with her words, as if she'd just stepped out of a candy factory. I wondered if her kiss would taste the same. "Brooke," I finally blurted. "My name is Brooke." Boppy grinned. "Tell me, Brooke, do you like carousels?" A random question on, I thought. Then again, I greater than were I at a carnival. "No," I answered quite frankly. Boppy frowned at my response, and I immediately felt monstrous for vanquishing that sweet, kittenish smile. Quickly, I revised my wording. "I mean, I not. I greater than like them, but carousels are for children, just too old for them, is all." Boppy's frown was replaced with a pout. "Nonsense, there's no such thing as too old for carousels. Easy for you to say," I retorted. "You're a clown in a circus. And you're also a clown in a circus, only a trite, boring one." I bit my lower lip, unable to think of anything witty and combative. She wasn't wrong. Before I could say anything, however, Boppy reached out a petite hand, wiggling her multicolored fingernails. "Come then, Brooke, let me show you the magic of circus." I wasn't hesitant to take her hand. Before long, she had led me through a labyrinth of twinkling lights and weathered tents, their faded stripes serving as battle scars from the carnival's continuous travels. After winding our way through galloping children and Friday night lovers hugging their tokens of stuffed animal affection, we arrived at the carousel. In truth, I didn't expect it to be so impressive. A small carnival meant small attractions, nothing too extravagant and time-consuming. But the carousel was undoubtedly the star of the show. Bridled horses of all breeds and colors reared, whinnied, and trotted, the momentum of their muscles carefully detailed on their sculpted forms. White and gold chariots, their sides painted dye and silver constellations, lined the spaces between. Pole-skewered stallions, a regal choice for those who preferred more luxurious seating arrangements. The carousel's core was plated in mirrors bordered deep by stems of dazzling bulbous lights, each light chasing each other in an infinite game of tag, like luminescent balloons being sequentially popped with a pen. I could hear the soft crack-play of each bulb as they faded in and out of their electrical current. There was only one thing about the carousel that put me off: mannequins. They'd been placed on several of the horses, a few sitting quietly on the scarlet seats of the chariots. They were crudely painted, and all of them lacked faces. It was as if whoever painted them gave up once they reached the heads. There were no eyes, no noses, no mouths, just white, empty faces staring blankly ahead. It was a tacky touch and a rather unnecessary embellishment. But I kept this thought to myself. My trance-like study was broken by Boppy tugging excitedly at my hand. "Come on." She pulled me to the open gate, and we climbed onto the carousel's deck, weaving through the majestic parade of lifeless steeds and faceless riders. Near the core, we managed to find two vacant black horses side by side. Boppy and I hoisted ourselves onto their saddles and clutched the spiraled poles that ruthlessly pierced their cold, solid bodies. "Hey," I said, "why isn't there anyone else on this ride, or in line, for that matter?" I was too engrossed in the carousel's appearance to notice before, but it seemed as if there wasn't a single other soul for miles. The laughs, screams, and ambient bustle of the carnival had faded into unusual silence. "The carousel is never busy at this time," Boppy explained sadly. "Too many trite and boring clowns think they're only for children." She winked and stuck the tip of her tongue through rows of pearly teeth. I smiled, rolled my eyes, and pushed my suspicions to the back of my mind. It's just a carousel. After all, what's the worst that could happen? Creaking, strong and vibrating, the turn of rusted gears awakening from years of unused slumber. The grand stampede of horses began to move slowly, one by one, up and down. "Tell me, Brooke," Boppy started, her voice low and sultry, "do you like carousels?" I nodded. Boppy smiled. "Ed, this is the magic of a real circus," she said. Under the warm, spinning canopy of mirrors and lights, she leaned over and kissed me. I was right. Her kiss tasted like cotton candy and saltwater taffy. If I thought carousels were only for children before, I sure felt like one now, giddy, light-headed, careless of the world around me. I looked over at Boppy, her bright green eyes looking back through her choppy blonde hair. That smile, that sweet, kittenish smile, would be the last I'd ever see of Boppy the clown. As the carousel quickened in pace, making its rounds and glittering whirls, I felt it. It started in my legs, this sudden paralysis, then up to my arms, hands, chest, neck. The last is set in stone was my face. I couldn't move a muscle. I could barely breathe. I tried to scream, but my lips were shut tight, fused, unable to part. I realized that not only were the mannequins tacky, they weren't mannequins at all. I was panicked. I was terrified. I couldn't move. Boppy was gone and I was alone. I don't know how long I'd been stuck there. I could only look straight ahead. Earlier, I could have sworn I heard my name called Desi. Several times. It had to have been my parents again. I'd tried to scream, to call for them, for anyone. But I couldn't. It was the last time I ever heard my own name. I'd never see my family again. They'd never hear any more complaints about how much I hated clowns, how carnivals never held much appeal to me other than their rides and excessively sweet, fattening treats. I was alone. I never S.A.W. Boppy again, but I heard her several times. I'd been hauled along with the rest of her frozen, faceless victims through various towns and cities. Every time I would sit and wait for someone different to come to the carousel, and every time she was with them, tell me, Boppy started, her voice low and sultry. Do you like carousels? I could still smell the fragrant mix of cotton candy and saltwater taffy, see that sweet, kittenish smile. The grand stampede of horses began to move slowly, one by one, up and down. This is the magic of AI Real. Circus, Story 6. The man who wasn't there, rumor had called this section in the vast city where I found wide-dwelling Old Hope, and it was often said that dreams of industrializing and modernizing the untamed Western coast had been rooted here by humble Americans. Those of the past had toiled under the hot sun, shedding blood and tears to erect the small town that with age and determination cultivated into an ever-expanding city. There was, in the mindsets of these fabled bright-eyed pioneers, nowhere else where the ideals of hope could exist. If they could have foreseen current times, however, they would have never ventured here from their homes. Absurd was the idea of this place having any connection to words like old and hope. Old implied that this section should be worthy of class, wisdom, culture, and elegance. Such things were only shadowy impressions left by condemned buildings past their grandeur. Hope, if such a word ever existed here, had been violated brutally and left to die alone in the gutter. Old Hope itself was but a symbol of an embalmed corpse left on display for mockery. I had not come here by volition, but by necessity, lacking the proper experience to be thought of as professional in lines of employment. I had been numerously and cold-heartedly rejected from over 50 jobs I had applied for. Salvation came from this decaying Old Hope, as I had been hired as a busboy for a modest bar in the evenings, whilst my afternoons were spent as a stockboy for a local market. The pay was meager, but sufficient enough that I soon gathered surplus. Soon I was able to acquire a $400 apartment in Old Hope, surmising it simpler than journeying by bus. Grateful though I was for work after such disheartening rejections, the atmosphere surrounding daily life there was vile and repugnant. I likened it to a cancer that not only wore on buildings by weathering and dilapidation, but marked itself on its very residents. Their faces conveyed the doldrums of never-changing repetition, eyes without expression, living but dead. Those who were not native to this section of the city, like me, always seemed hesitant of interaction, as if keeping silent was an unwritten law of Old Hope. Solitude colored my nights in my humble apartment, as floor I lived on lay vacant, although I was told room 17, the one across from mine, was in use. I had never seen anyone besides my landlord and his family enter or exit the apartment. Sleep came easily enough, despite the howls of dogs and the low roaring whistle of nearby cargo trains. In the back of my mind there was a constant and nagging sensation that seemed to warn me that something was nightmarishly twisted about the very streets I walked daily. It was an intangible phantom Washington, hiding to pounce at every corner. It was dread, accumulating slowly and hauntingly with each passing day. No matter the time or hour I spent, what freedom I had away from Old Hope, horizon became limitless for me in such small hours, for I could go to places far from that rusting pit, where people were alive and talked freely without showing fear. Despair always crept back upon me, as the buses did not run past 6 on the weekends, and the walk back to what I called home from the closest stop was not shot. Hence my sense of normality was always pled by that dark truth. I did not fear old Hope dark, for I loathed it in all aspects equally. Night brought no peace to it, just as day did. Even looking upon a starlight sky became a phantasmal horror, for it seemed as flickering stars were giving their dying breaths. The moon, when it shined down upon the long-forgotten spires that lined the skylight, conveyed the ghoulish crypt of a rotting kingdom. All of this was but a prelude to the true, tangible fear that caused me to recollect and write. The hour is of no importance, only that the day had been hot and overbearing. I was working in the market, stocking a few packs of cigarettes and matches behind the counter. At first I thought it was only an illusion conjured up by my mind after dealing with daily paranoia and overwork. Blanking again out of curiosity, with more attention and at greater length, my eyes widened in fear, my mouth drying, sweating beating down my brow as I began to tremble in shock. It was an old man in a very dirty brown suit, with a crook-patterned tie that was loose around his neck like a twisted noose. Atop his head nestled a tan cowboy hat whose tassels were as tattered as his suit. He wore rim glasses that would look more akin to an older woman than a man. Worst of all, his face was badly battered in burns and scabbing that looked to be rotting away. I stifled a scream, but it stuck to my throat and sunk back down into my lungs. The man grinned wide, showing a mouth full of yellow teeth and crawling maggots. I felt my stomach churn in pain watching this cadaver of death ate itself. I knew this person. I had loved this person. It was my own grandfather, who had not died a year ago. Holding my sides and gasping for air, I snapped into panic when a hand placed itself on my shoulder. It was my co-worker Terence, who looked concerned at my gestures and crazed stare I had given to the window. The apparition gone, I sighed deeply, telling him I was just feeling that the heat was getting to me and I should get some rest. Being a kind friend, he agreed to let me off early so I could go relax. Peaceful sleep did not come for me that night, nor has it since, for always in my dreams was the disfigured form of my grandfather, swarmed by files as he breathed his miasmal vapors of the tomb, leaving me in a frenzy of sweat and tears. When I awoke daily, Kitty brought only more visions of the spectre, first outside the market, then the corners of alleys, to the dim-lit bar's parking lot, and even beyond Old Hope where there had been haste to me. Always was it just out of focus in my sight, haunting me eternally, then brought the visitation that ended it all. Up to this point I had never seen it in my apartment complex, albeit it loomed in the neighboring street near the train tracks. It was early in the morning when it occurred. I had been resting dreamlessly before being awaked by the sharp slam of the front door to the complex. Always being a deep sleeper, I had found it odd that I could be roused by such a trivial noise. I had almost drifted back to sleep before hearing loud footsteps on the stairs that echoed in my room. Horror still was the fact they sounded not only heavy but wet, as if they were strutting through mud in rubber boots. Tension soon mounted as I lay still in my bed, for the nose was drawing closer and closer into my very floor before stopping just outside my door. Out of a morbid fascination, I slowly crawled up from my bed and to the door en masse. Like movements drawing what courage I could to stare through the peephole. To this day I regret ever getting out of my bed and curse myself all the more for even coming to Old Hope. For what I saw cannot be described fully to any other human being, for, indeed, it was the spectre that had followed me always, but it was different now. Its head lay at the back of a broken neck that stretched to snake-like portions. Its limbs were that of a beetle, and they frequently convulsed in fits of unnatural fury. Its body was bloated to such an unreal size that I wondered how it fit into such a small. Always worst of all came when I saw its head, for its eyes were those of a fly, while the head remained a melting skull spewing tar-like liquid in its wake. It stayed there but for an instant, hence before liquefying in a whitish illuminated slime, slithering its way under the door into room 17. This transfiguration was too much for human senses, and bewildered by what I had seen, my body gave way to fainting. I found myself on the floor at sunrise, determined with all my energy to see what lay behind the door room 17. I pounded loudly on landlord's door, and it was apparent from his glassy-eyed look that he was rather surprised by this unexpected visitation so early in the morning. Not one to mince words, I simply told him it was urgent that I see room 17. Giving me a puzzling look, I simply repeated myself without changing my tone. Sighing, he accepted my request, and we soon found ourselves standing outside the door. Nothing of the previous night had lingered in the hallway. There were no signs of the strange black, liquid, or sickly white pus. I assured myself that the answers to all of this lay behind the door. No matter how outlandish or wicked, I assured myself. Soon the key was placed into the lock, the knob was turned, and all was laid bare before us. How could I possibly describe what was there? Nothing could have prepared me for it. Even my grimmest imagination. There was nothing inordinary about the room. By contrast, it was a perfectly normal to me, for everything in that room belonged to me. There were surrealist paintings of insects and otherworldly nightmares that Doreen had given me. There were unwashed hung suits that I had worn several times out exploring. The one closest to the door, a tattered brown suit on a coal track. There were the pictures of my family and grandfather I had kept since childhood. Most of all, there lay in stacks next to my antique typewriter stories of horror I had used in bleak, sleepless hours. I had forgotten this room was my study, that I had the key in my wallet, that I had invented my hauntings purely by daydreaming and not taking my medication. All of my fear and paranoia was a lie. There remained one last detail to this that makes me doubt if it was all just a hallucination brought on by my masochistic negligence. While I have long gone on with my life, it remains wondering what I really experienced, for I had truly not been in my study since forgetting to take my pills. Freshly printed words lined a page inserted into the typewriter, though I had heard them before. Only now do I think deeply on them, for it read, "The truth is always an abyss." Story 7. The Cat with Human Teeth. There I was, scratching my 9th scratch-off ticket in a row at my local convenience store. My eyes widened with hope, but also sank in with the anticipation of disappointment. The other 8 representations of my gambling fuel rested in pies inside the store's waste bin. Revealing each number using my lucky penny, I scratched away, while simultaneously grinding my teeth. In a moment of displeasure, I tore the ticket to shreds and tossed it aside with the rest. It was another loser. At this point, I was about $50 deep and knew I had to shake my bad habit. However, betting my smidgen of wealth, H was an angel in comparison to the demons I'd annexed. Throughout my short-lived life, I had just turned 18 a couple months prior, an achievement of sorts for a boy with such a shaky childhood. My parents didn't always gravitate to each other in the way that happy couples do, like flowers reaching for sunlight. No, their values were pitted against one another through verbal quarrels and physical exchanges. With these background altercations and the scent of booze that bled through the air and walls, getting sleep at night was like pulling teeth. Even days I was left me alone, I could swear on my life that I heard my mother and father screaming and yelling as if they were still in the house. I'd witnessed the walls shake, knocking down lamps, and picture Fr. Almost in chain reaction to the vibrations. On top of that, I recall seeing my dad pacing in the upstairs hallway countless times. Every time this happened, even with certainty that no one else was there, I'd search around the residence anyway. I never found a reason for the disruptions. Taking the home life a lot worse was my younger brother Gregory, as his young mind solely paired Kung Fu Scion as a counterpart to the madness. At the age of 9, my brother had picked up a handful of the traits dispersed throughout the paper-thin walls. The anger, the sensitivity, even gradual changes in appetite all became a part of him. As a being, getting through school is tough enough for him, let alone the miracle that was me receiving my bright white graduation cap and gown earlier in the year. However, I've made a tremendous effort in aiding his educational progress, despite resistance on various occasions. But enough about that. Back to my gambling woes. I cut myself off, hoping to replace my vice with a more pleasant distraction, one that would come in the form of gray fur and paws. My older sister Jennifer, who took my brother and I under her wing in recent years to help us resuscitate, adopted me a 3-year-old gray cat. This was compensation for leaving me during the bad times. I decided to head home and meet the little furball, whom I predetermined would be named Smokey. Opening the front door, I was met with a brush of softness, both from a touch of fur upon my leg and within the audible meow that had dispensed from the adorable pet. The short-haired gray cat had seemed to already have a comfortable sensibility to my presence. In return, I knelt down to pet him, but only to be welcomed by a strained screech. The high-pitched scream didn't come from my new purring family member, but from my sister, Gregory. She yelled out, "Get over here right now." I made my way over to the hallway, in which she voiced her concern to see what was going on. With my dismay, black marker ink was plastered across the tan-hued wall. The ink was shaped into something that made my eyes widen in shock. I was petrified, terrified. Depictions of cats with their teeth ripped out, along with a young boy tearing his own teeth out, were drawn. My little brother had crawled out of his room on all fours with a wide GR in on his face, and smudges of black ink spread across the palms and backs of his hands. "Gregory, why did you do this? You made such a mess." My sister Jennifer had yelled in exasperation. "Clean it up right now." My little brother just stared with that creepy little grin on his face. Not a single word spoken. All that was received was a lingering silence up until the quietness was suddenly cut off by something frightening. An ear-splitting shriek emerged from my brother's mouth. Both my sister and I clamped our own ears tightly to protect our suffering eardrums from the noise. After a minute or two, silence returned, and little Gregory scurried back into his room, the door shutting and locking behind him. Jennifer and I, still horrified and shaken, ended up cleaning the wall hours. Later that night I was woken up by the sound of deep and slow scratching, like sharp claws were being embedded into wood. My first thought was that Smokey was trying to leave the room, but he remained curled up at the edge of my bed. As I rose up from my slumber and began to step towards my door, the scratching increased in both speed and volume, the noise only ceasing when I turned the knob and opened the door. I crept my way down the stairs as cautiously and quietly as possible, as to not alert my sleeping siblings. However, my tactic was deemed a waste, with the clamor of what sounded like pots and pans being tossed around in the kitchen. Stepping into the vicinity of the noise, I came across the culprit. It was my cat, Smokey, perched up on the kitchen counter, knocking down the pans that hung from the backsplash behind the stove. My brain was boggled by the fact Smokey managed to sneak past me unnoticed, especially with me walking incognito. Looking down, a canvas of red caught my eye. Streaks and drips of what appeared to be blood trailed across the hardwood floor, leading to marks dug into the wall. I assumed this was the source of the scratching sounds, but Smokey was blood-free, and the engravings were far too large for such a small cat to make. Besides, he was in my bed when the commotion began. I couldn't make heads or tails of it, but I was too tired to investigate. Hoping it was just a chimney-lurking raccoon, I cleaned up the mess and headed back to bed. The next morning was an aroma-filled paradise. I could almost taste the greasy maple bacon. As the scent gathered in the air, the poached eggs and golden brown wheat toast danced around my imagination before I rushed down to the dining room. My sister was already at the bottom of the stairs, about to call my name, as I interrupted her with a close collision. I hopped into a vacant seat and dived right into the gloriously prepared plate of food. Glancing over at Gregory, I acknowledged him with, "Good morning. Get a good night's rest." However, I was met with complete silence and a defiant grin once again. I expected another outcry, but instead my eyes made contact with Gregory's hands. His fingertips showed signs of stress, but the severity of it was beyond the likeness of fingernail biting. His nails were receded down to the flesh, and the skin freshly broken, with signs of blood loss. My brother began to open his mouth and motion with a foreshadowing of vomit, then let out a mass of black liquid and gunk. The regurgitation left me disgusted and, frankly, quite baffled. I immediately turned to my sister to see if she witnessed what unfolded, but it was already too late. My brother vanished from the dining room table, along with the obscure crime that spewed past the crevice in which his lips were shaped. Almost instantly after the disappearance, I woke up. The events that appeared so real were conceived as a nightmare. That familiar smell of breakfast again lingered around the house. I figured these scents had just temporarily carried over from the bad dream. Upon strolling on down to the kitchen, my theory was proven right. My sister had already left for work, and it seemed the kitchen remained untouched. Except for one part, a subtle, pulsating breath greeted my ears. The wetness of a single drop of saliva was felt along the peak of my shoulder. Maybe it wasn't the greatest idea to look up at this point in time, but my curiosity collided with my impulse reflexes. I swear my eyes almost slivered out of their sockets, because when I stared, I was looking at something that made me question my sanity. My little brother Gregory was up above me, defying gravity, his hands flat against the ceiling as if it was the floor. He was foaming at the mouth, bug-eyed, his face pale and gray, that with a reddish tint. I remained froze in place from fright. When Gregory leapt down from his perch, he immediately dashed upstairs on all fours, quicker than I could ever run. After this, a resounding animal-like whine, the kind you'd expect to hear when a cat's tail is accidentally stepped on, roared throughout the home. Smoky, I yelled out as I ran up to my room. What happened from there disturbed me. To say least, tears hit my cheeks. My face expressed disgust in both movement and color. I was upset in more ways than I knew a person could feel. The combined emotions of terror, revulsion, wretchedness, and purple anxiety overcame me in this very moment. My cat Smokey lay rested with his teeth torn out, but surprisingly still conscious. I watched as my brother, with radiating yellow eyes, rip out his own teeth as well, oddly enough, quick and easy, like tearing off a bandage. Gregory then placed his own teeth into Smokey's mouth and did the same to himself with the cat's fangs. The scene before me was remarkable, but in the worst sense. A young male, about 4.5 feet tall, with a mouth resembling a feline's, a once cute-looking feline, altered into a humanoid appearance via its jawline. My brother picked up Smokey's new form into his arms, walked away, and vanished right through the wall, neither of them to be seen again. Many of us are raised up in a not-so-perfect home life, but how people handle this is varied. One might grow up scratching lottery tickets, while another scratches up the walls of the home they live in. A more vulnerable host attracts negative energy at higher rates, qualifying for a manifestation of their own demons. In this case, my brother was a target. Also, a fair warning for you. His body is still out there somewhere, possessed by something sinister, along with Smokey, the cat with human teeth.